All right, so I'm going to go over just a few questions from this Jeopardy, and it's the ones I have circled because it's very similar to at least each one in their type, and that this way you can get some help going over each kind. If you have any other questions on any of the questions I don't go over, just let me know. All right, so the first one that we're going to go through is this 300A. All right, so it's for this one, we're just solving a basic inequality. So we have negative 10x minus 8 is greater than 2. And then from here, we're just going to solve for x. So we solve it just like we did in the equation. So we are getting rid of our minus 8 first by adding it to both sides. And then from there, now I have negative 10x is greater than 10. And then we have to isolate that variable x by dividing it by that negative 10. But remember our rule that when we divide or multiply both sides by a negative, as we're trying to solve and isolate, we need to flip our inequality. So it now becomes x is less than negative 1. And remember, because on our number line, when we have numbers that are in positive, let's say we have 1 and 2, 2 is greater than 1. However, in our negative part of our number line, the quote-unquote bigger number is now actually smaller than, or less than, that quote-unquote smaller number, because the closer we are to 0, the greater our number is on the negative side. So here, because our characteristics change from one side to the other on the number line, we need to make sure we flip that negative, or that inequality, when we're multiplying or dividing each side by a negative, because we're jumping to the opposite side. We're like taking the opposite of it, if you guys can remember that. So it's jumping to the opposite side of the number line, which is then changing its characteristics. And now we just need to graph. So we have negative 1, and then we're going to pick 4 other points. Remember, as long as you're staying consistent, it doesn't matter how you make these points. It's going to be a not solid circle. So at negative 1, it's going to be a not solid circle. And then we're saying x is less than negative 1. So every single number that's less than negative 1, we need to make sure we draw our graph. And that right there is our final answer. On your test, you will need to draw your own number line when we are just solving these basic inequalities. I will give you the number line when we're doing our compound inequalities. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next one. All right, so the next question is 200C. So here we're given a graph, and then we're given the type of statement, and then we have to figure out what the answer is based off of that, the overall answer. So for this one, it tells us it's an end statement. Let me use a different color. It tells us it's an end statement. And then it gives us this graph here. And remember, when we're looking for an end statement, we're looking for where our graph overlaps. And none of these overlap at all. So since it doesn't overlap, that means that this answer is no solution, because it is an end statement and our graph does not overlap at all. So since there's no overlapping, that means that there's no number that is shared between both graphs. So there's nothing that satisfies both of them at the same time, which is what our end statement needs to do. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the next one, 400C. All right, so here we have our compound inequality. And remember, when we have our compound inequality, if it's going to be an or statement, it must say the word or. So if I don't see the word or, I know it's an and statement, and it actually is going to create two separate inequalities. So I have this first one here that I'm going to write. Negative 17n minus 12 is less than 13n minus 12. And then we have our second inequality, which is going to be that middle part and the right inequality now. So I'm going to write this one in a different color. And then we have 13n minus 12 is less than or equal to negative 8 plus 9n. And we know that this is going to be an end statement because of the way it's written. It needs to be greater than negative 17n minus 12. At the same time, it's less than or equal to negative 8n, or negative 8 plus 9n. So it is an end statement. And remember, it's an or statement. It must say or. So if we don't see the word or, we know it's going to be end. So now we're going to go ahead and solve this. So I'm just going to move my variables to the left-hand side, because that's just the way I like to solve them. So I subtract 13n from both sides, and I get negative 30n minus 12 is less than negative 12. Then I'm going to go ahead and add over my 12 to both sides, because once I move my variables to the left, I need to move my constants to the right. So negative 30n is less than 0. And now from here, a lot of you are still making a mistake where you're seeing a 0 and like, oh, okay, this means it has to be special. It's only special if our variable cancels out. Now I'm going to divide each side by this negative 30. And now I get n, and since I divided both sides by negative, I need to flip my inequality is greater than 0. So that's my one statement. Then I'm going to go ahead and move on to the other one. So I'm going to move my variable to the left-hand side, because that's just the way I like to do it. So minus 9n from both sides. So now I get 4n minus 12 is less than or equal to negative 8. And then from here, we're going to add 12 to both sides. So now we get 4n is less than or equal to 4. And now I'm going to divide each side by 4. So n is less than or equal to 1. So now we are going to graph All right, so my first one I'm going to graph is this n is greater than 0, so it will be an open circle, so not solid, and we're going to be greater than 0, so it's going to the right. And then I'm going to graph the second one. It's going to be a solid circle because it's equal to, it's not just greater than or less than, and then it's less than, so I'm going to be going to the left. And now remember, where our graphs overlap in an end statement is our answer, so my final answer is actually here. So I can write my answer like this, circle it, and be done. I can write it as a set of all n's such that n is greater than 0 and less than or equal to 1, or any kind of combination of this here. We could also have written that inside our statement there instead. All right, so that is it for this question. Now we're going to move on to the last category and go through some of these questions here, just to go over kind of the different types of specials. So once again, when we see the word or, then we know it's an or statement, and it has to tell us the word or if it's going to be that, and this one it does. So I'm going to go ahead and just do these separately. So we have 20x minus 15 is greater than or equal to 6 plus 17x, or 16x minus 12 is less than 9x minus 5. Now let's just go ahead. I'm going to subtract 17x from both sides. So I get 3x minus 15 is greater than or equal to 6. I'm going to add 15 to both sides. So 3x is greater than or equal to 21. Divide by 3. X is greater than or equal to 7. Or, and now let's go ahead and do the other one. We're going to subtract 9x from both sides to move our variables to one side. So 7x minus 12 is less than negative 5. Then we're going to add 12 to both sides. So 7x is less than 7. Divide by 7, x is less than 1. So now we have our graph. So we have 7 and 1. So I'm going to count by 2, so negative 3, negative 1, 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, and 11. And I'm just going to graph the 2, and then we're going to read our graph. So it's greater than or equal to 7. So we know it's going to be a solid circle at 7. Greater than is going to the right. And then here we have less than 1. It's an open circle, or not solid. And then here it's going to the left. So now with an or statement, if they don't overlap, that's fine. That's just our answer. If they do overlap, then that's telling us something special. So here, it's just an or. They're going in both directions. This is my final answer. So I can just go ahead and circle this as my answer. Or if I wanted to write it in our set notation, we say set of all x's such that x is less than 1 or x is greater than or equal to 7. And that would be our final answer. All right, just 2 more in this video. We're going to go over question number 800. So once again, I see it's or, so I know it's an or statement. So I'm just going to write my 2 separately. 4x minus 28 over 3 is greater than or equal to negative 12, or 1 is less than 2x plus 7 over 5. All right, I'm just going to solve these individually. So I can multiply each side by 3 to get rid of that fraction because it's a division. So 4x minus 28 is greater than or equal to negative 36. Then I'm going to start isolating my variable by adding over 28. 4x, let me just write that a little bit neater. For x is greater than or equal to -8, divide by 4, divide by 4. X is greater than or equal to -2. And we're not flipping it because we're not dividing by a negative number. We're dividing by positive. It just happens to be the number that we're dividing into is negative, which is fine. All right, and then we're going to go ahead and do the next one. So once again, I'm going to multiply each side by 5. So 5 is less than 2x plus 7 minus 7. So -2 is less than 2x. Divide by 2. -1 is less than x. So I'm now going to write this with my variable on the left-hand side. And you see it's opening to my variable, so it still needs to open to my variable here. So x is greater than -1. So I do advise that you write it on your left-hand side just because as we're graphing, we can read the inequality and the statement and not have to worry about flipping it or changing the way it's being read, and we can kind of just read it like we naturally do. All right, so now from here we have -3, -2, -1, 0, 1, 2. All right, and I'm just going to go ahead and graph them. So the first one that we have is greater than or equal to -2, so it's going to be a solid circle. So greater than is going to the right. And the next one we have is greater than -1. So it's an open circle going to the right. All right, now remember, when it's an or statement and they overlap, that means we need to think about it a little bit more. So from here, I'm going to have to do a final answer. And I see, since it's or, only has to satisfy one at the same time. So every single answer that's part of this purple line is including all the answers to the green. So that means that my final answer is just this one here. If I just label this black line, that black line will include all of our red or purple answers and all of our green. So our final answer for this is just going to be this black line. And then that means that all we actually have to say is that x is greater than or equal to -2. That will include every single answer that's also in this. In math, we want to simplify everything as much as we can, so we don't actually have to say that. All right, so then if we want to say our set of all x's such that x is greater than or equal to -2, that will be acceptable as an answer as well. All right, now remember, if you are going to be using these lines like I am to like our graphs to be determining our final answer, just make sure you clearly are writing your third answer, or your third graph, which is your final answer, in like a different color, or just make sure it's shown very clear that that is your final answer. All right, so now we're moving on to the last one, which we have, it's an end statement, it says it. So we know it's n. So this one we are looking for overlap. So -5b plus 10 is less than or equal to 30. And 7b plus 2 is less than or equal to -40. Now we're just going to go ahead and solve them. Subtract 10. So -5b is less than or equal to 20. Divide by -5. So when it's divided by negative, we need to flip it. So b is greater than or equal to -4. And now we're going to go ahead and solve the other inequality. minus 2, so 7b is less than or equal to -42. Divide by 7, and b is less than or equal to -6. And then we're going to go ahead and graph this to check to see what our solution really is. So we have -8, -7, -6. Let me just write that a little bit neater. -5, -4, -3, and -2. And then we're going to graph them. So we're greater than or equal to -4, so we know it's going to be a solid circle. And going to the right, less than or equal to -6, it's still solid. And this one is going to the left because it's less than. So now, the thing is, though, it's an and statement and nothing overlaps. So our answer for this is no solution. And that would be our final answer. All right, and that is it for this video.